I haven't told this story to many people, because it requires a listener to suspend their disbelief. When I've shared my story in the past, I usually get looked at like I suffer from some kind of mental condition or something. Nothing could be further from the truth. I know the ball from the bounce. You have to when you work in finances like me. I'll keep this short and to the point. Back in 2007, I used to live just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, in a very laid-back but very populated suburb. I lived in a townhome that was about a 30-minute commute to my job in the city. I was on a salary, which meant that my hours would vary from week to week. I could come home as early as 12 o'clock in the afternoon or as late as 3 o'clock in the morning. It really depended on what was going on at Wall Street. I remember that this happened on Father's Day. After work that day, I decided to spend some time with my parents and have dinner with them. All went well, and I made it back to my place at around 9 p.m. As soon as you walked into my townhouse, directly in front of you was a staircase that led to a small hallway, with the master bedroom being the first door and the spare bedroom being right next to it. My usual routine was to grab a snack from the downstairs kitchen before heading upstairs. But since I had dinner that night, I decided that I would just go upstairs, take a shower, and get some sleep. The first thing I noticed was that the light switch at the bottom of the staircase was not working. I figured that the light bulb had shorted out and needed to be replaced. No big deal. However, as soon as I hung up my jacket and began to make my way up the stairs, a low hissing sound stopped me in my tracks. The sound was very disturbing. It sounded like a pissed-off lion. I immediately looked up. I still get an icy feeling in my stomach when I recall what was at the top of the staircase. During nights, the light from a nearby lamppost would come through the upstairs window and provided just enough light to see the door of the master bedroom from downstairs. The door was open, but that wasn't what made my skin crawl. On the ceiling just above the doorway was a dark figure. I'm going to tell you what it looked like to me, knowing full well that most of you won't believe me. Trust me, I've spent years trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I thought I saw, but the voice in the back of my mind keeps telling me, no, you saw it. You can try to deny it all you want to, but you know the truth. What I saw on the upstairs ceiling appeared to be a person on all fours in a quadruped position. From my vantage point, I couldn't make out many details, but one thing that made my stomach turn was when the figure moved its head, and locks of long hair fell from its frame and dangled. The fear became overwhelming, and I let out an embarrassing yelp and staggered back. The figure then let out a guttural shriek and disappeared from my field of view. I heard a few thudding noises followed by the sound of a window smashing. I fled the house and retreated to my car, where I phoned the police. After 10 minutes of heavy breathing and looking side to side from the safety of my locked car, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway behind me. 2 officers approached my car, and I rolled down my window and explained the situation to them. The 2 officers entered my townhouse with guns drawn. After about 20 minutes, they re-emerged. They searched the entire house, and aside from a shattered window in the hallway, nothing appeared to be out of place. Of course, I went through the notions of giving my statement and filed a report, but nothing ever came of it. I told the officers that I saw someone at the top of my staircase in front of my bedroom door, which was true, but I left out the part that the person appeared to be crawling on the ceiling like they were possessed. I moved out of that place into a shitty apartment closer to my work about 2 weeks after that night. To this day, I fail to come up with any kind of rational explanation for what took place that night. I'm not exactly the kind of person who just makes things up for attention. I've gone down the rabbit hole of online communities, sharing their experiences with cryptids, aliens, and other unknown creatures that allegedly walk this earth. And even though I 100% stand by my story, I can honestly say that these people have way too much time on their hands. I don't want to end up like one of those obsessive people who go insane chasing a ghost. I've come to terms with the fact that I'll never truly know what I saw on my ceiling that night. I'll just put my story out there and let people take it for what it's worth. Thank you for listening. I grew up during the 1980s in a very tight-knit community in Georgia. When I was a kid, I used to love camping in my backyard. Almost every Friday night, me and my little brother Donnie would set up a tent in our backyard and spend the night playing with our G.I. Joes inside the tent. Our neighborhood was nice, but the surrounding area was a bit shady. You see, this was at the height of the crack cocaine epidemic, and within a few years our small town became infested by addicts and drug dealers. I remember there was an old man named Mr. Carl who was once a pilot in World War II. He used to live across the street from us. His wife died of cancer around 1984, and after that, he went off the deep end. 3 years after his wife's death, he became addicted to crack and began wandering the streets at night. It wasn't long after that when his house got repossessed by the bank, and Mr. Carl became homeless. Me and Donnie would see him almost every morning sleeping on a bench at our bus stop. Sometimes he would be awake and would talk to us. We knew Mr. Carl, so we weren't afraid of him, and he never tried anything with us. He was always very friendly. After a while, Donnie and I noticed that Mr. Carl was no longer around. We asked our parents if they knew anything about what might have happened to him, but they didn't have a clue. I can't recall how much time went by since the disappearance of Mr. Carl, but I would say it was at least a month. So on one Friday night, me and my brother were in our backyard playing with these rubber band rifles our dad made for us. It was a piece of wood with a wooden clip glued to the top of it and a nail sticking out the front, so you could stretch a rubber band around the nail and clip it to the top. That way, when you release the clip, the rubber band went flying. Me and Donnie were shooting up plastic toy soldiers when we heard something rustling in the bushes outside. Now, this is Georgia. We've chased away our fair share of raccoons and stray dogs. And with our new makeshift weapons, we were feeling extra brave that night. We decided not to go get our dad, and that we would handle the intruder ourselves. So we both exited the tent and made our way to the very back of the yard, where a chain-link fence separated our property from a small forest area. Donnie had brought along the flashlight and was pointing it into the forest just beyond the fence. When we got to the fence line, a figure emerged from behind a tree. I recognized the jacket that the person was wearing. It was a dark brown bomber-style jacket, and I saw that the person was also wearing one of those Army veteran caps. There's only one person I knew who wore a jacket like that, Mr. Carl. However, when I got a better look at the guy in the woods, it didn't really look like Mr. Carl. He was definitely wearing his clothing, but the man appeared to be way too young to be Mr. Carl. I couldn't get a good look at the man's face. He was looking down, so the bill of his cap concealed his features. That's when I noticed the dark red stains all over the man's jacket and jeans. Me and Donnie just stared at the man for about 30 seconds before asking him what he was doing back there. The man then reached down and grabbed a large axe that was lying at his feet. He then began coming towards the fence. Me and my brother dropped our wooden guns and took off back towards the house. As soon as I turned around, I felt something fly past my head. I looked to the side to see the axe flipping through the air. It crashed into the tent, causing it to collapse. The rest of that night is a blur to me. According to our dad, when me and Don burst into the house, we were absolutely hysterical. It took about an hour to get the full story out of us, and by that time, the mysterious man in Mr. Carl's jacket was gone. I just remember my parents talking to a police officer in the living room later that night. As far as I'm aware, there was never any follow-up, and I don't know if they ever caught the guy or retrieved the axe he threw into our backyard. This incident effectively put an end to our Friday night camping, and we never figured out what exactly happened to Mr. Carl. I'm 21 years old. This happened to me shortly after I turned 18 and graduated high school. My family moved to a new house in Texas. My mother claimed that it was so we could get a fresh start, but I knew the truth. She was ashamed of all the trouble that my sister Jocelyn had gotten into in our hometown. Weeks later, after we settled into the new house, Jocelyn disappeared. My mother received a phone call from my sister's parole officer. Apparently they found her in Atlanta. And to make a long story short, Jocelyn wasn't thrilled about the move, so she ran away to a friend's house. Unfortunately, I couldn't fly back to Georgia with my mom, and I had no choice but to stay in Texas. The next morning after my mom left, I went for a jog around the new neighborhood to familiarize myself. It was when I stopped to catch my breath and change playlists on my phone that I felt a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the unmistakable sensation that you get when you're being watched. I looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew that someone was watching me from somewhere close by. I decided to cut my walk short. As soon as I reached my house, I locked the doors and immediately ran upstairs to take a quick shower. While I was washing up, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. I quickly turned off the shower and listened. Another thud followed. I quickly threw on my clothes and ran downstairs to check things out, but there was nothing. The front and patio doors were locked, so I was left feeling a little confused. Trying my best to keep my composure, I was finally able to breathe when my mom called to check up on me. I didn't want my mom to be worried about me. She was already stressing out enough because of the situation with my sister, so I told her that I was fine and that I was going to order takeout and chill for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I finished up my dinner while binge-watching How to Get Away with Murder on Netflix and eventually fell asleep on the couch. I suddenly woke up a couple of hours later. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was freezing. The thermostat showed 42 degrees. That's when that dreadful feeling came back. I felt like a deer being eyeballed by an apex predator. Danger was close by. My stomach felt like I was doing somersaults. Something was very wrong, and that's when I noticed that my phone was missing. After a brief search on the couch, I couldn't find it. Annoyed, I decided to use a website called Text Now on my laptop. It's a free online service that I sometimes use to track my misplaced phone. Trembling, I typed in my number. Almost immediately, the ringtone abruptly stopped, and that's when I heard heavy breathing coming from the other end. I barely had enough time to respond when I heard a knocking on the glass of the patio doors. I grabbed an unscrewed bedpost from the closet before checking things out. When I looked out through the doors, my heart stopped. Holding my phone was a dark figure in a goat mask. Before I can make out any other details, the masked man slid my patio door open. At the speed of light, I burst through the front doors and headed for my neighbor's house across the street. There, I banged on the door until an older woman came to greet me. She immediately called the police after I explained everything to her. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, and after a thorough search of my house, they found no trace of the intruder. After that ordeal, there was no way I was staying in that house alone, so I asked the officers if I could accompany them to the station, to which they obliged. While I was at the station, one of the officers informed me that they had located my phone outside the house. However, since there were no fingerprints on it, added to the fact that I couldn't give a detailed description of the assailant, it was a dead end. There was one last unpleasant surprise when I unlocked my phone to call my mom. Upon seeing what was in my photo gallery, my blood ran cold. The officer saw that I was uneasy and asked me what was wrong. I handed him the phone. There was about 15 videos of me sleeping on the couch, each nearly 3 minutes long. The masked man that I saw had been inside my house and was watching me while I was sleeping. I felt so violated that I became nauseous and called my mom and told her everything. Hours later, she and my sister came straight from the airport to come get me. We didn't live in that house much longer after that. For the longest time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had woken up with that man standing over me. Perhaps I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. It took a while, but I finally came to terms with what happened. But I would be lying if I told you that this experience doesn't haunt me to this day. This story took place during my early childhood, so I'll share events that I can recall. It's mostly bits and pieces. There are some things that I can remember in great detail, and some that I can only vaguely recall. So I'll do my best to try to piece things together without getting off track. I have 2 sisters. I'm the middle child. They also remember a good majority of this as well. This happened back in mid-2003. I was 5 years old back then. My 2 sisters were about 4 and 7, so my parents hired a babysitter. Her name was Julie. She had been friends with my mom in high school. She actually lived with us for a while. All I really remember about her was that she was very tall, skinny, and had dark blonde hair that was always tied up. We lived in an apartment complex at the time. It was a place called Oats Creek. So Julie babysat us while my parents worked. She even ended up dating one of my dad's co-workers, which brought a few jokes at my dad's job about him being a pimp. Basically, she became a family friend. Not long after that is when Julie started to change. She started getting very impatient and rude, and even straight up abusive to us, mostly targeting my sisters. My older sister once told me that she thinks that Julie possibly tried to kill her. Apparently, she did something to piss her off, and in response she grabbed a bottle with green liquid inside of it and tried to force her to drink it. She didn't know what this substance was, and she couldn't get into great detail about the incident itself. I guess her memory isn't as good as mine. Julie would get physically violent with us over the stupidest reasons, such as accidentally knocking something over or spilling a drink. We were just kids. Of course, she only did this when my parents were at work. They had no idea she was a fucking lunatic. That was until our family cat attacked her. Julie closed the door with my little sister's hand still in the doorway. It was an accident, or at least I think it was. This, of course, hurt my little sister, who started crying in pain. That's when our cat jumped onto Julie's leg and latched on with her back claws. She was biting and swatting at her, with her tail puffed out, hissing and everything. Basically, she snapped. My parents were a bit surprised, as our cat wouldn't even hurt a fly. It was around this time that they started to suspect that Julie was a bit of a whack job. She still continued to watch after us while my parents worked. This is where my memory gets a little hazy, as if my mind is trying to block something out. There was one occurrence that I still remember to this day, 18 years after the fact. In our room, my older sister had her own twin-sized bed. Me and my little sister shared a bunk bed on the other side of the room, and I slept on the top bunk. Anyway, one night, my little sister woke me up because she couldn't sleep. So she climbed up on the top bunk and we started talking quietly. After a while, she said, "Hey, watch this. I can hang off the edge without falling." However, she slipped and fell to the ground and started screaming and crying. That's when Julie storms into the room, yelling and cursing, and spanked my sister with one of my dad's belts. She then picks her up and throws her onto the bottom bunk, and screams for her to go back to sleep, and then storms out, slamming the door behind her. Julie was so enraged that she didn't even see me watching her. I was frozen, completely in shock. I didn't know what to do. I can only remember one time clearly where Julie physically struck me. as I said earlier, she mainly went after my two sisters. I can't remember the exact details, but I called her a bitch and she smacked me across the face. I don't remember why I did it, probably because she was yelling at us about something stupid, which was usual. She told my parents, and then my dad asked her, "Well, what did you do to set him off?" She then got pissy with him and said, "He was just a disrespectful little shit." Eventually, not long after that, Julie went away for good, moved on elsewhere. When she was finally gone, that's when me and my sisters came clean to my parents about everything. Julie struck us several times and yelled at us constantly. My parents can't really remember most of these events, as their memories aren't that great either. But I'm pretty sure they felt absolutely terrible for us, having to go through all this. We never saw or heard from Julie again. I don't know if my parents ever confronted her about anything, but they definitely cut her out of our lives for good. They never contacted the police as there wasn't really any proof of abuse. Everything was all hearsay. Neither of my parents ever caught her actually doing anything. I wish they would have. I'm not sure why my sisters or myself never said anything sooner, like when Julie wasn't around. I'm pretty sure she made threats to us if we did, and perhaps we can't remember. Years later, we found out that Julie had been arrested and served time in jail. Unfortunately, we never found out the exact reason why. Sometimes we all still talk about these events, and I know that I'll remember this for the rest of my life. So yeah, that's my abusive babysitter story. Julie, burn in hell. This happened during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I made this drive about every 4 to 6 weeks to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There were two main ways to take to the town that my university was in: stay on the interstate system throughout central Illinois and St. Louis, or branch out on back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 minutes from my college. I usually took the back road simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and the occasional towns that I would have to go through. But on this particular time, I took the interstate system all the way there because there was high potential for winter weather. So I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast after another, when about an hour from my exit, traffic came to a standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at this point. It was also a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home to catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past the traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must be some kind of accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again, and eventually picked up pace as soon as we all passed the accident. That's when it started. I will admit that I do like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. What college kid doesn't? I was in the right lane with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me, and that's when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered out loud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and the person could easily pass me in the left lane. Suddenly the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcast and kept a close eye in my rearview mirror. The person continued to flash their lights, half blinding me in the darkness. "Asshole," I said, flooring it to the left lane. I maneuvered around a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had. Except they followed my every move. Now, being a female in my early 20s, I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to just be the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering sex traffickers in my town and along the interstate that runs through it. One of the town's papers had even ran a series of stories regarding multiple sex and human trafficking rings used around this interstate for capturing victims because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook the disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles per hour in the right lane, unless I had to go around someone. The car continued to follow me, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few cars behind. I finally took the exit to my university and looked back, and the car was still behind me. It seemed as though that this person was trying to get me to pull over. Is there something wrong with my car that I just can't see? I wondered silently. There was no way in hell I would be pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. It's exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start out. At this point, I had no idea what to do. Looking back, I really should have drove straight to the local police station, but I was too flustered and scared to even think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Had I cut anyone off? I don't think so. I don't think I did anything to make any drivers around me this pissed off. I'm a relatively good driver, and I tend to mind my own business on the road, not engaging in any road rage or anything stupid like that. So I stupidly began driving to my apartment. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and that's when I started to panic. What if they followed me all the way home? What the hell should I do? Call the police and send them on some wild goose chase to look for me in this car while I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off of a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and toward my apartment, I had an idea. As I got closer to my exit, I did not get in the far right lane to turn off. At the very last second, I jerked the wheel and careened across the gravel shoulder so close to the grass that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned down the exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had come to a screeching halt and was honking its horn manically. I broke down in tears for the rest of the way home, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number, or even really a good description of the vehicle, so I never reported the incident to the police. I have no idea what exactly was happening that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when traffic was stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's very clear from the stickers that I have on my car, one being my university's name, and one that says Dog Mom, that it was likely that I was a college-aged female. All this person had to do was end up next to me to see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night and have just the wrong intentions. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, roughly 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My hometown was once famed for being the pottery capital of America. Unfortunately, due to changing times, the city's glory days are long gone. I was about 16 years old at the time and was attending the local high school. Also at the same time, there was a performing arts school that had opened nearby, and I was attending some of the weekend classes and made new friends with some of the students who attended the art school. One October, a group of us decided to get together. There was 5 of us total. The majority of the students who attended this school lived at least a half hour away from the school itself, so it was up to me to find something that we could all do, since I was the most familiar with the area. There is an Ohio State Park in my city, near the outskirts. This park has many famous tales surrounding it, from the death of a woman who was left at the altar, to the killing of Pretty Boy Floyd, who was an American gangster and bank robber. But it's most notoriously known for Gretchen's Lock, which is a dam system that was built around 1836. The lock system is named after the man who built it, who lost his daughter due to an illness at sea. His daughter was supposedly buried at the lock for many years, although her body has been removed. However, many say that her spirit still lingers in the area, searching for her mother. Regardless, it's October, and that seems like the perfect place to go. and this group was myself, Amanda, Beth, Sarah, and Abby, and we were all in Abby's car, a brand new Dodge Durango. We all packed into the vehicle and headed to the park. The park setting is down a very large hill, nestled against a creek, which is why the dam was needed over 100 years ago. There was a mill house, horse trails, walking paths, campsites, and many other picturesque features. That is, during the day. There's an ominous feel there at night, almost as if you're being watched. Granted, we were teenagers, and we weren't really there for the haunt as much as we were there to catch a buzz of some kind. Luckily for us, Amanda brought the good stuff. We were all excited to listen to music and get stoned in the dark, and just enjoy ourselves. We smoked and smoked and smoked. You could have cut through the fog in the SUV with a knife. We were listening to the latest Metro Station CD. Mind you, this was around 2010, 2011. The sounds of music and coughing filled the vehicle to the point that Abby opened the door to get a breath of fresh air. I sat in the middle between Amanda and Sarah, which meant Beth and Abby were in the front, who were best friends anyway. Sarah wasn't a big smoker, and she was starting to get paranoid. Mind you, for a good reason. It was pitch black outside, and there was little to no light produced by the single solitary streetlight located in the middle of the parking lot, about 100 feet away from where we were. Sarah kept mentioning that she heard leaves crunching from outside. We told her to never mind, and that it was just all in her head. After about 15 minutes of Sarah having a panic attack, she tried to calm herself down. We agreed to turn off the music and hear Sarah out. We were there, sitting in silence, except for the occasional flick of a lighter. What we heard next left all of us sitting up in our seats. We could hear leaves breaking. There was a rustling noise, but it sounded like it was a good distance away. I told Sarah not to worry, and that it was probably just some animal. After about 5 minutes of us sitting in silence, I started telling the old story about the young girl who perished at sea. The girls made me stop, because they were getting a bit too freaked out. Abby said that she was too afraid to drive out of the park, and that she just needed to find a happy place so she could start navigating the dark roadways back to the main road. I was about to get up and go outside and light up a cigarette when Sarah sat up and put her hand on my leg. Her eyes were the size of 50-cent pieces. She leaned in and whispered to me, "I heard something right outside." I laughed it off quietly and told her that there was really nothing to worry about. What happened next, I will remember forever. Abby goes to start the car with no response. The engine didn't turn over, which freaked Abby out, considering it was a brand new car. Sarah started to panic, making sure that her door was locked. Abby tried to start the car again. Nothing. Just the sound of failed ignition. At the third attempt, her SUV fired up, and you could hear the engine echoing through the surrounding hills. Abby turned on her headlights, and the blood-curdling screams that followed, I will never forget. All 4 girls, including myself, screamed at the top of our lungs. We were in shock at what was in front of us. Surrounding the entire vehicle were men and women, all dressed in black and wearing ski masks. They were holding dead cats and raccoons up by their tails. The animals were slit right down the middle. Abby threw the vehicle in reverse, not knowing what to do. As soon as the vehicle began to back up, the men and women standing around the vehicle started yelling and screaming and banging on the vehicle, smacking the windows and kicking the tires. It was as if we were in the middle of a riot. The banging and pounding stopped, and suddenly everything was silent again. But they all were still there. We could still see them. Abby slowly backed out of the parking spot. Some of the men and women removed their black masks and revealed their smug smiles. They all seemed to be eerily happy. Abby hauled ass navigating through the twisting roads that led out of the park. When finally we were almost out, we stopped at a stop sign, and we all came out of our fear-induced comas and started talking about what we all had just witnessed, when suddenly 2 feet slammed on the hood of the SUV. In sheer panic, Abby slammed down on the accelerator, causing the man on the hood to slam into the windshield, completely shattering it. He then rolled off moments later. Traveling at what felt like the speed of light, we hauled ass out of the valley where the park's located, pulled into an upscale residential neighborhood, and I immediately got out of the SUV and lit a cigarette to calm my nerves. We all shared our thoughts about what happened. I was speechless, and I felt horrible for taking them there. Once I was dropped off, I never spoke to Abby or the rest of the girls again. I think they had some PTSD from the events of that night. I know that Abby told her father that she hit a deer that night in an attempt to explain the dent on the hood and the shattered windshield. I don't believe we'll ever get to the bottom of what happened, but further research shows that there was a lot of cult activity in that area around that time. What we experienced there ended up being much scarier than the ghost story I had planned to tell that night. After my parents divorced when I was 5, my dad and I moved to a town called Southbury in Connecticut. My dad worked at a Shell station, and once I was old enough to ride my bike on my own, I would visit him when he was working after school. One day during the summer, I rode over to visit my dad, and this lanky, weird-looking kid walked into the Shell station. I noticed him pocket one of the snacks off the shelf. I tugged on my dad's sleeve and pointed out the kid, and my dad went to confront him. When the stolen merchandise was found on him, he was asked to leave. He then stormed out of the store screaming profanities. We later discovered the kid was Adam Lanza, who went on to massacre all those people at Sandy Hook in 2012. Fast forward to December of 2007. I was staying at my mom's in Baltimore when I met her new boyfriend. My mom needed a babysitter on short notice because she and her boyfriend wanted to go on a date. She found a guy named Nick, who was a relative of a friend. Despite him being slightly weird, we got along just fine. We played Star Wars on PS2 and popped in some R-rated movies. I remember liking him and was willing to have him babysit me again. But before that happened, Nick went on to kill both of his parents and 2 younger brothers in February of 2008 before hiding the weapon and trying to cover up the murders. His full name is Nicholas Wagner Browning. Fast forward again to 2014. My stepdad was in the military, and he got transferred to a base in South Carolina. I was a moody teenager by then, and I didn't really care much for being around other people, and absolutely hated being trapped on a military base. I spent a lot of time online in chat rooms, and gave my personal information out pretty irresponsibly. One day I got an email message with a number to call. Stupidly, I called it, and the guy who answered said his name was Dylan. I started hanging out with him and a couple of his friends. That is until I realized that all of his friends were racists, and were trying to recruit me into their neo-Nazi cult. I broke off communication with them. Dylan Roof went on to kill 9 people 1 year later, at a church in Charlestown. I know all of these sound like impossible coincidences, but I swear all of these accounts are true. It makes me nervous whenever I meet new people, because I wonder if they'll become the nation's next mass murderer. I like to start off this story by saying that you're always better safe than sorry. I listen to horror stories all the time, but I never thought that I would be sharing my own. For privacy reasons, I will be changing the names in my story. My name is Jessica, and I'm 15. I would like to think that I'm a very cautious person. I live in Ireland in a big suburban neighborhood. I usually like to go on walks almost every day. It's nice to go outside every once in a while during this pandemic. It started off like any typical day. I got up at around 8 a.m., went to get some coffee, did some workouts before school. Around this time, a snowstorm was approaching my country, so it was very cold outside, and it got dark around 5 p.m. After I got done with an exhausting day of school, I went down to go watch some TV in my living room. Shortly after, I got bored and decided to go on a walk. It was snowing outside, and it looked really nice for a walk. When I left my house, I didn't bring my dog with me. He can be quite annoying to walk at times, and I just wanted to enjoy myself. As I was walking down a long stretch of sidewalk, it was about 4:30 p.m. at this point, and it was starting to get dark. I'm the type of person who's very perceptive, and also paranoid. I think it's good to be a little paranoid sometimes, as it could possibly save you in certain situations. I look up to see this man walking past me. I've seen this man around my village before, and he's always given me the creeps. I always get this weird vibe whenever he's around. Other times when I've walked past him, he stares daggers at me, with an unsettling grin on his face. I don't want to be too judgmental, but I think that he may have something wrong with him. So as he walks past me, I keep my head down to avoid eye contact, but I can see from the corner of my eye that he is staring at me. I keep walking, but I suddenly had an urge to turn around. As I did, I saw him just looking at me. It made me feel extremely uncomfortable. To describe this man, he is about 6 feet tall, looks to be in his mid-40s. His hair was in a tight man bun, and he always seemed to be wearing the same clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt with dirty shoes. My heart started beating fast, so I turned back around and continued walking. Over the next 10 minutes, I could feel him watching me, which meant that he was most likely following me as well. I turned around again to confirm my worst fears. There he was, still staring me down like some kind of creepy statue at a Halloween store. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds before I felt my fight-or-flight instinct kick in. My mind scrambled, trying to figure out what to do. He was only a few meters behind me and closing in. I came to a junction and waited for the light to give me the signal to cross the road. There weren't many streetlights on this road, which made me feel even more uncomfortable. While I was waiting there, I heard the man walking closer to me. I was hoping that he would just pass by me, but that wasn't the case. "Hey there." I turned around to face him and just gave him an awkward smile without saying a word. As I crossed the road, he kept close behind me. Hey there," he said again. I offered a quick response. Hi." I spoke in a strong voice, without sounding too eager to talk to him. I kept on my way, but he followed me and continued the conversation. I'm trying to get rid of phones in my house. I'm trying to sell them off. Would you be interested in buying one?" As soon as he said that, I knew that I was in danger. This man wasn't going to leave me alone, and I knew he was lying. I may be young, but I'm not that stupid. So I just said, "No thank you. You have a nice day." And I kept walking. He continued to follow closely behind. I was now thinking about how unfortunate it was that my phone was broken, and therefore I couldn't contact anyone for help. So I began to internally panic. I turned a corner, and I noticed that there were no people or cars. It was then that I decided to make a break for it. I didn't look back. I just counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Run! I soon realized that I had made the correct decision when I heard the pounding of footsteps close behind me. I knew I shouldn't have, but I looked behind me one last time as I ran. The lighting wasn't the best, but I could clearly see that he was holding a large kitchen knife in one hand. I was so scared that my heart was practically beating out of my chest. I felt sick, but I had to think fast. The man was gaining on me. We were running through my village at this point, and I could see some bystanders in the distance. That's when the unthinkable happened. I felt a cold object strike my back. After a few more steps, I could feel my blood make its way down my spine. That's not a figure of speech either. This lunatic had stabbed me. I staggered a bit, but I kept running even though I was badly injured and bleeding. Fortunately for me, there was a small police station just across the road from my neighborhood. Knowing that this was a life or death situation, I sped towards the police outpost. Once I got to the entryway, I looked back to see the man running in the opposite direction. I ran inside, completely hysterical. 2 police officers immediately came to my aid. One of them called an ambulance, while the other applied pressure to my wound. I frantically told them about the man and tried to explain what happened. The ambulance arrived and took me to the hospital. I was in shock and so overwhelmed by the whole situation. None of it felt real. Fortunately, the stab wound wasn't that deep, and I have since made a full recovery. I gave a detailed description of the man and mentioned that I had seen him around before. He must have fled somewhere far away, because to my knowledge, they never caught him. That was the very last time I ever took a walk by myself. I would like to remain anonymous for reasons that will become obvious. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was 16. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was an asshole back then. Me and my friends were a bunch of idiots who robbed, sold dope, and partied like rock stars. The area that we were in shall remain nameless, but I will say it was in Canada. One day I went to this guy's house. Let's just say he was a friend of a friend. He wanted to buy some electronics off me that I had recently come into possession of. We'll call this guy Mike. Now, Mike was this fat white dude, I would say in his late 30s, sleeved up on both arms, with the words "fuck you" on his fingers. I knew all about Mike because of his reputation. He was constantly in and out of prisons for various reasons, mostly drug-related and assault charges. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why the hell would I be associating with a dangerous guy like this? The answer is about what you would expect. I was just a young, stupid kid. I went into his house with a friend because I needed help loading the stuff inside, and I also needed to show him that everything was working properly. Mike asked, "How much?" I gave him a price. I can't recall the exact amount I was asking for, but he obviously didn't like what he heard. "I'm not paying that much, kid. $400 is the best you're gonna do." We argued back and forth for a little while, until my friend chimed in. "Hey, fat ass, quit fucking us around and give us our money, or you can go fuck yourself." Mike then grabbed a chrome handgun out of the cushion of his couch and pointed it at us. He cocked the hammer back and shouted, "Okay then, get the fuck out of my house, you little bastards." We left and took the merchandise with us. We drove off laughing about the whole thing. Inside I was losing my cool, because I had just had a gun in my face. After we hid the merchandise, I headed home. Later that night, I went to a house party with my girlfriend and spent some time drinking and smoking weed, until my girlfriend wanted me to take her home. We were both pretty intoxicated when we started walking back to her place. Along the way, we had to stop so she could take her shoes off. That's when I heard from behind me, "Surprise!" Then a loud bang. I grabbed my girlfriend and ducked down behind a car as more shots rang out. That's when I realized that my girlfriend had been shot in the chest. She was still alive, but was going into shock. I put my hand over her wound and kept telling her that it was going to be all right. The shooter made his way around the car, and that's when I saw that it was Mike. There was a second gunman with a sawed-off shotgun with a bandana around his face directly behind him. Mike ripped my girlfriend away from me and pointed the gun at my face. I begged and pleaded with him. "Mike, dude, she's got nothing to do with this. Let her go." "Damn shame, kid. She's cute." He aimed his gun at her head, and anger completely overtook me. I charged at him screaming, "I'm gonna fucking kill you!" But before I could do anything, I was hit in the back of the head by the man with a shotgun. And Mike turned his gun on me and said, "Your turn." By a stroke of luck, a few of my friends came out of nowhere and began shooting at them. I stayed down, and when the shooting stopped, they were gone. The next few hours are a blur to me. I vaguely remember talking to the cops and somebody telling my girlfriend's family what happened. I can only imagine how crushing it must have been for them. I was eventually released, and as soon as I got back home, I took a nosedive straight into a bottle of whiskey until I passed out. A few days later, the police caught up with Mike and his asshole friend. After that whole ordeal, it made me start reevaluating my life. I'm a much different person today, and it's a good thing too, because most of the people I knew back then are either dead or in prison. My name is Jackson Caballero. I'm a 15-year-old sophomore currently living in Texas. Some backstory. I live in a house with my mom, dad, my younger brother, and my mini Australian shepherd. My neighborhood is a safe place, which makes the events of this story even more unsettling. I was the only one awake in my house at the time. It was a Monday morning, and I had begun my usual morning routine of making breakfast and watching YouTube videos. As I sat down, I realized that I had left my headphones upstairs, and I would have to go and get them. For some reason, I've always had this irrational fear of the second floor of my house. I don't know why. I just do. So I was a bit apprehensive about going upstairs and grabbing my headphones. As I walked up to the second floor, I heard a noise coming from the stairs. I stopped and listened. When I didn't hear anything else, I thought to myself, "This is ridiculous. There's nothing up there." So I walked up the stairs and grabbed my headphones off the table. When I turned around, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the bathroom door move. It was as if someone had been looking at me and quickly tried to duck behind the door. I froze mid-step and turned towards the door. All the lights were still off, and I didn't want to alert whoever was in the bathroom. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a stranger looking at me through the crack in the door. I nearly lost it, and I ran down the stairs as quickly as possible, and immediately called the police. The operator said to stay on the line in case something happened. I then heard a loud thud from outside, and it made me look out the window. Whoever was in the house had jumped out of a second-story window and was now limping towards the gate. The guy didn't get very far. 2 police cars pulled into the driveway and stopped the man. The whole commotion woke my family, and I had to explain to them and the police officers what happened. The intruder was arrested and ended up getting a 15-year prison sentence for breaking and entering.